Yesterday afternoon, among other stops, we visited a small house way out beyond any of the towns. Situated along a dirt road, it was surrounded by its agricultural fields. There were, as everywhere, the remains of dried out corn stalks, but there was also a field of dragon fruit. While I react badly to most tropical fruit, it was interesting to see it grown. Each short tree was topped with a rubber tire, no doubt to control the growth and to maximize the crop. At the time, I wondered what farmers used to do before the advent of rubber. But we weren't visiting to see the house or crop. We came to see local Kisar Island weavers at work. There were, interestingly, for anyone curious about Norse or Greek mythology, three women: a young girl helping out, a youngish woman weaving, and an older woman creating the warp. On Kisar, as throughout the Maluku Islands, weavers create a mixed fabric. Most of the cloth is a normal weave, but it has also thin strips along it worked in a single ikat. Ikat is a resist dyeing and hand weaving technique in which patterns are created by tightly binding and dyeing individual yarns before they're woven into the cloth. These yarns form part of the warp and create a pattern as the weft is added. An ikat pattern can be quite simple or very complex, and across Maluku, each island has developed its own particular motif. Watching the weaving, I realized it was a powerful, almost mythological metaphor for several things we've seen here on Kisar Island. The warp is the island itself, its features fixed for millennia, while the weft is the human communities that have interacted with the island and with each other over the many centuries. The weft keeps growing, but the warp is fixed until the craftswoman finally cuts the last thread. Kisar Island's weft continues to grow, and by now it has made quite a cloth. Its human history stretches back far longer than I assumed, all the way back to the late Pleistocene, some 16,000 years ago. Our own experience of Kisar's historical cloth wasn't nearly as extensive, but we still managed to touch at least 5 periods, beginning with some of the island's cliff paintings and running down to the present. Ancient fortifications, a tradition of Jewish heritage, see the previous post, the Dutch colonial period, and modern Indonesia. I suspect weavers have been at this here almost from the beginning, and they'll go on plying their craft until the final thread is cut. All in all, the cloth of Kisar's island's past and present is fascinating and beautiful. Our guide was the very knowledgeable Yitzchak, a local man from Arata and an English teacher at an island high school. He seems to know every inch of the island and was our guide in Arata, on our walk to the old city ruins, and at the cliff painting sites. In this, we were very lucky, since Kisar Island isn't set up for tourists. Indeed, there are none. There are no signs, no historical markers, no historical or tourist maps. Our historical tour began in the deepest past, with some of Kisar's earliest residents creating cliff and cave paintings on the limestone cliffs that circle the island. There are apparently at least 40 such sites identified by archaeologists. These glyphs, created in red pigment and apparently occasionally in other colors, include humans, animals, boats, and geometric figures. In some of the caves, which we didn't visit, there are also stenciled hands and arms estimated to go back as far as 18,000 years to the late Pleistocene. The ones we saw were no more than 3,500 years old. The cliff and cave art was only discovered in the last 15 years, and Yitzhak says it was not unknown even to the indigenous community. The cliff paintings we visited were accessed by a dirt road near Kisar Island's tiny port, which seems far more for small fishing boats than large ships, though there is a weekly ferry and a small cruise ship every 2 or so years. Climbing up to a shelf above the beach, the road ran along the coast for about 1 kilometer. The shelf was at most a few hundred feet at its widest, with a short, steep drop down to the ocean on one side and very steep slopes and cliffs on the other. Little grows on the rocky shelf besides low scrub, and the only animal life we saw were small island goats. We visited two sites, both equally interesting. The first, and much larger, was way up, requiring a steep climb and some scrambling over shifting rock. This site had a diversity of images, including anthropomorphic stick figures with perhaps headdresses, geometric circles, and boats with human oarsmen. Boats not so different from the fishing boat we saw leaving the small harbor later that afternoon. There were also a number of circular geometric images, along with some too bleached out to make out. The second site was much easier to reach, requiring not much more than a 50-foot walk through the scrub to the cliff face. Here, there was an alcove cut by erosion under the cliff, with rock paintings both inside it and nearby. There were more stick figures and geometric circles. The alcove itself was interesting too. Areas of the roof were blackened, likely by intentional fires, as the painters and their companions must have camped below the cliffs. Archaeologists have noted many such campsites in the caves and alcoves along these limestone cliffs. While the island continued to be occupied continuously in the centuries that followed, the next clear pattern in the Weft doesn't become visible until the 14th century, when the old city, the Geri Lama Purpura, was built. Having heard the two traditions about the burial of special treasures, whether sacred or despised, see my last post, we decided to make an early morning trek to the ruins before the heat of the day. This time, an off-road vehicle was provided, along with two machete-equipped men whose job was to clear the brush from the overgrown path. They also served as our guides in the old city itself. The off-road vehicle was certainly necessary. After leaving the main road, and even the smaller roads, we wound along rutted dirt tracks up and down low hills. There were occasional houses, fields, and bamboo fences, but it was largely an area of low bushes and few other signs of human habitation. It was uncomfortable up front in the car. I can only imagine how bad it was in the back. I think you really have to want to reach the old city. Finally, we parked by a single low building at the foot of a rise, a shed for goats, and another for processing palm sugar. Palm sugar is important both for cooking and for the local innocently strong alcohol, which is made from sugar, pineapple, and cinnamon. But then we began our climb. The path was unusually clear, though we took some false turns, maybe leading somewhere else, or perhaps placed there to catch the unwary or the unwanted. We walked uphill past the occasional goat, scrub, and small trees until suddenly the path opened onto the Great Gate. I don't know what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't the ruins of a massive fortified town. The gate itself was a narrow opening leading to the top of a wide hill, just wide enough for a wizard, but not a Nazgul. Sorry for my inner nerd. No buildings remained, just the great circling stone walls, mounds, and foundations, also built of large stones. Archaeologists suggest it was built in the 14th century, long before the arrival of the European colonial powers. Even after all these years, it was clear the old city was once a significant hill-type fortification. Its strategic position overlooking the sea towards Timor must have played a real role in protecting the island, and in its sandalwood and camphor trade that came up from Timor, and the spices that came south from Ambon and the Banda Islands. It was without a doubt the most significant archaeological feat accomplished by the people of Kisar Island, and it's no wonder it attracted such rich folklore, or that it came to be seen as the birthplace of a people. The old city continues to be a place both of holiness and mystery. It's no coincidence that both the black box and the items associated with the Dutch were buried here. What better place than what the locals saw as the city of the ancients? Joseph, one of our guides, showed us where it was said to have been buried. But he also told us that modern missionaries and archaeologists have looked there and found nothing. One locally born informant who now lives off island suggested two possible reasons. Perhaps the holiness and mystery of the city protected these treasures, or perhaps the villagers misled outsiders about the true burial site. I've decided to incline towards the mystical, but I leave the choice to you. It's unclear when the old city was abandoned. Archaeologists suggest it was at least a few hundred years, while our guides suggested it happened in the time of their grandparents or perhaps their great-grandparents. Our third pattern in the cloth was created by the Dutch in the 17th century. Like nearly all present-day Indonesia, the Netherlands held Kisar Island as part of its colony, and it was the Dutch who appointed the Bakar family, still reigning as Rajas of the island. The VOC, the Dutch East India Company, built two forts, Fort Delfshaven on the hillside above the hotel in Kota Lama and Fort Velonhaven near the harbor. Less remains of these two forts than the old city, built 300 years before them. While the wall has been reconstructed and a historical sign added at the site of Fort Delfshaven, no such work has been done at Velonhoven, and I suspect it will vanish within a few more years. There is, however, a more lasting remnant of the Dutch still woven into the cloth. 8 families whose descendants still form a distinct group in Kota Lama hold a tradition that their ancestors were marooned on the island in the mid-17th century. At the time, they were given land by the Raja, and they still carry Dutch surnames to this day. The Lericks are one such family. They and others have houses along the main street. Rabbi Ben, who has a nose for Dutch descendants, found them on our very first day on the island. Justine Lerick runs a dress shop and something of a bakery just down the street from our hotel. They still make delicious Dutch-style sweet bread, which has become the mainstay of our breakfasts. Justine also pointed us to another phenomenon on the island. Her family now lives in a newish house just behind their shop, but they also keep the traditional house made of unfinished wood standing just behind the current house. It's roofed in tin now, but she said that in her own memory it was thatched with palm and sago leaves. The same pattern shows up throughout the island. As we traveled through Kisar Island, I noticed several traditional houses, many of which were still thatched, especially near Irata. Moshe indeed mentioned that these are no longer lived in, but are kept instead as ritual or symbolic residences by their owners. That image of Warp and Weft kept coming back to me on the drive home, past these symbolic houses, still standing, though no longer lived in. If the island itself is the warp, with Kisar's cliffs and hills fixed since antiquity, patiently waiting for hands to work across them, then the Weft is everything seen in 16,000 years which people have laid across it on the island. Ochre handprints on the cliff face, a fortified hilltop city, a black box, and a set of Dutch plates buried in the same hopeful ground for opposite reasons. A Raja's Dutch surname, a shop that still bakes sweetbread from a recipe carried a very long way. Some of these threads have already frayed to nothing. The forts are going the way the old city went 3 centuries before them, and I don't think anything will stop that. Others, like Justine's Bakery, or those quietly kept thatched houses which no one sleeps in, are still being worked into the cloth, even now. The warp doesn't care which threads last and which don't. It only has to hold still long enough for the weaving to keep happening. And on this small, overlooked island, someone always seems to be weaving. Sampai jumpa lagi.